So what do you do when you're working on 3 different projects and hit roadblocks in every single one? Well, if you're me, you stay up way too late watching YouTube, stumble across the music video for Taylor Swift's Bejeweled, see a sparkly cloak that's on screen for literally less than a minute, and decide that in that moment you don't want to be a responsible adult who troubleshoots problematic projects. Instead, you're going to follow the dopamine and make a sparkly cloak. To start, I pinned the sequin fabric along the mesh to keep it from shifting around as I cut, and then measured 51 inches down, which on me gives an ankle-length cloak. I'd originally planned to make a circle cloak, but my fabric wasn't wide enough to reach ankle length, and I didn't want a seam in the back, so I went with my tried and true method of a rectangular body gathered into the hood. Because the sequin mesh has a little bit of stretch, I stabilized it with satin, and for the lining I used a sparkly fabric that was in my stash. The lining was a bit wider than the satin and mesh, so I trimmed it down to match up. I cut the hood out of a spare bit of satin to avoid wasting fabric, making it as wide as I could. Then I used the satin as a pattern for the sequin mesh and the lining. To help everything stay in place, I used a historical technique known as flat lining to base the mesh and satin together. This essentially means that the 2 fabrics become one fabric and is very handy when one fabric is a lot lighter weight than the other. I also did this for the body of the cloak, and I hung it off the side of my ironing board to try and keep the fabrics lying flat, and to help my posture. Then I pinned the outer fabric and lining together, right sides facing each other. And then I stitched up the 2 sets of hood pieces and 3 sides of the cloak body, leaving the top edge of the cloak open. Once everything was sewn up, I trimmed down the extra seam allowance to prevent bulk along the edges. And now that I have a tailor's ham, I used it to press open the seam of the hood. Next, it was time for jewels. I bought these off Amazon, and I'm quite impressed with how good they look. I didn't want the embroidery thread to show inside the hood, so I sewed on the rhinestones before putting in the lining. Once the front edge was properly bejeweled, I could put in the lining. I'm using another historical method, folding the edges inside and sewing them down by hand, as I felt the modern bag lining method would potentially damage the fabric and rhinestones. Then I whip stitched all the way around to secure the raw edges. I then ran a gathering thread all along the top edge of the cloak, only on the sequin and satin side. This method lets me gather the cloak into the hood and enclose all the raw edges. I gathered the fabric into place, using a lot of pins to hold everything exactly where I wanted it, and then stitched the body and hood together. In the past I've used a machine to do this, but this is 2 layers of heavily sequined fabric and I wasn't sure how my machine would respond, so I opted to stitch it in place by hand with back stitches. One quick try on to make sure everything fit right, and then I folded the raw edges of the lining toward the inside and ran a gathering thread. Then I could stitch it to the main body with whip stitches to hold everything in place. This cloak is surprisingly weighty, so I used a heavy-duty hook and eye for the clasp, securing it with strong silk thread. Then I added some last bits of bling to complete the look, and my shiny cloak is complete. Or so I thought. I got all the way to this point, tried it on in preparation for shooting the reveal the next day, and went, oh no, oh no, oh no, 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 no. Remember when I cut the hood out of spare satin to avoid wasting fabric? Yeah, that was a mistake. I am normally a very rational person who doesn't like to jump into things headlong. I prefer to do eons of research ahead of time. Well, I didn't do that this time, and my hubris got the better of me. In my effort to not waste fabric, I cut the hood slightly smaller than I normally do, and when everything was all said and done, it looked less bejeweled and more jazz hot. So not the look I was going for. So after moping on the bed like a Disney princess at 10:30 at night, I got up the next day and started the painful process of removing all the jewels from the hood. And then the even more painful process of seam ripping the hood from the body. Thankfully, I had enough of all my fabrics left over that everything worked out. I cut a large rectangle out of everything, carved off one side so it wouldn't be a sharp edge at the top, and then it was a case of rinse and repeat. Baste the sequin mesh to the satin, bejewel the heck out of the front edge, sew in the lining by hand, gather the outer fabric and sew it to the hood, gather the lining fabric and sew it to the lining side of the hood. The only thing I did differently this time was adding a fine line of top stitching along the front edge. I didn't film the process because I wasn't sure it would turn out, but 10 out of 10, highly recommend. It makes the seam sit crisper and nicer and just looks way more professional. This time, it was ready for the reveal. So despite that major hiccup with the hood, I am delighted with how it turned out and have no regrets about jumping headlong into a project. Are there aspects that would have turned out better if I had given myself more time to think about it? Absolutely. But overall, no regrets at my end. This was so much fun, although I think I will be finding sequins in my house for the next 6 months, at least. Seriously, if you are going to make a project like this, be prepared for sequins to get everywhere. I have vacuumed twice now and still find them in my bedroom. I have found them in my parents' bedroom, in the bathroom, in the living room. I even found one on the floor at my day job, as well as the hotel room when I went to Fan Expo. I'm not saying don't make a sequined cloak, I'm just saying be prepared. Sequins, much like glitter, will follow you everywhere. I also have an urge to add rhinestones to everything from now on because my magpie brain loves how this looks. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you want to see more videos like this, please consider hitting the subscribe button and sticking around. I don't normally recreate pop star looks, but I do indulge in shiny, cloak-filled shenanigans. So if that's your jam, there will be more adventures down the road.